The heroes have done it. They've slain the dreaded Demon King, and it only took 10 years. They arrive at the royal capital and are met by crowds of adoring fans as they parade through the streets. When they arrive at the palace, the king thanks each of them personally. Himmel, the hero, Eisen, the warrior, Heiter, the priest, and Frieren, the mage. The king announces that following the Demon King's defeat, the world will enter a new age of peace. That night, the citizens party in the streets, and the heroes reminisce about their long journey together. They look to the sky and notice the error meteor shower above. Frieren remarks that the view from the city isn't ideal. She knows a better vantage point and promises to show it to them in 50 years, the next time this meteor shower will occur. They all agree to meet again in 50 years, noting how it's a good symbol for the start of this new era of peace. Wait, no. Life goes on, even after saving the world, especially for an elf. The 10-year adventure was but a mere trifle in Frieren's existence. She tells them that she'll travel for a bit collecting spells, maybe 100 years or so, and bids her companions farewell. The years fly by, and Frieren finds herself in need of Shadow Dragon Horn for one of her spells. The reagent dealer hasn't even seen one in the past 30 years. She recalls coming upon one during the journey to kill the Demon King and wonders if Himmel still has it. It's almost time for the meteor shower again, so she decides to visit him. The city has changed, but not as much as the hero. He's twice as old and half as tall. Luckily for Frieren, he held on to the horn, though his cabinet's been exuding an evil aura the whole time. Maybe keeping it in his house wasn't the best idea. The two get ready and head out to meet up with the other two members. Heiter has aged a bit more gracefully, and Eisen, well, he's basically just hair, so who knows. They set off, and after a week of walking, they make it in time to watch the meteor shower together for the last time. Shortly after returning, Himmel passes. At the funeral, Frieren realizes that she never really got to know him. They only traveled together for like 10 years, so they were basically strangers. 20 years pass. Frieren wanders the outskirts of the holy city when a little dead-eyed girl happens upon her and remarks that she looks lost. The elf tells her that she's looking for the home of Heiter. It turns out that the little girl, Fern, is a war orphan that he's taken in. The priest asks if the mage would take her as an apprentice. She says the girl would only get in her way. So he pivots and asks her to stick around to help decipher an old grimoire that might hold the secrets to immortality. And in her spare time, she can teach Fern magic. Frieren goes to look for her and finds her standing on a cliff. Fern says that the priest told her that she'd be a mage once she's able to blast a hole in the rock sitting on the opposite cliff. The elf asks if she likes magic, and is reminded of herself when the girl answers, somewhat. Later on, Frieren goes over the 3 factors necessary for long-range magic: the amount of mana, the strength with which it's fired, and the level of control the mage has over it. Fern's early dissipation problem is due to her shortage of mana and lack of firing strength. The elf tells her it might take years to master, though her level of control is high, which is normally the area people struggle with. The seasons change as Frieren tutors the young mage while deciphering the grimoire. Soon, 4 years have gone by, and Fern's abilities improved at an accelerated rate. One night, while Heiter checks on the elf's progress, he collapses and becomes bedridden. Frieren goes to inform her student, but she refuses to go and tend to him. She still hasn't hit the rock, and if she doesn't keep at it, she worries he'll die before she does. Fern recalls how the old priest saved her from ending it all after her parents died in the war. She wants to prove that she can take care of herself, so he can die knowing his actions weren't in vain. Frieren accepts her determination and leaves her to it. The elf finishes translating the grimoire and tells Heiter that there aren't any spells that grant immortality or bring back the dead. But the old priest isn't surprised in the slightest. He didn't actually expect her to find anything like that. He asks about Fern's progress, and she says that it wouldn't be wrong to call her a full-blown mage at this point. This pleases him, Now Fern won't get in her way. Frieren realizes that Heiter tricked her into teaching the girl so she could take her on her journey. He asks her to take Fern and leave that night. He doesn't want her to experience any more loss. The elf refuses, telling him that the young girl has been preparing herself to say goodbye. She begins to tear up, imploring him to give Fern a proper goodbye, to make as many memories as they can before his time comes to an end. After he passes, Frieren takes Fern under her wing and the two begin traveling, doing odd jobs in exchange for spells. They meet an old herbalist who asks them to restore a statue of Himmel to its former glory. After cleaning it up, the woman suggests adding flowers for color. Frieren has the idea to use blue moon weed flowers, Himmel's favorite, but she's never seen them and can't conjure them. The old woman says, unfortunately, it's been decades since any were seen in the area. 6 months go by and their search hasn't turned anything up. Fern begins to worry about Frieren's obsession with magic and worries that they're wasting their time looking for something that doesn't exist. The herbalist gives her seeds of a related species and says that she feels Frieren will understand if she voices her concerns. The elf hears her out and says she'll end her search soon. Fern begins to protest about what soon means to an elf when a seed rat steals the pouch. They follow the creature to an abandoned tower in the woods and find a blue petal at the foot. Frieren flies to the top and finds it covered in blue moon weed flowers. The young mage doesn't get her determination, but Frieren finally feels Himmel's promise to show her the flowers from his hometown fulfilled. Despite his passing over 20 years prior, she feels she's getting to know him better even in death. The herbalist is ecstatic upon seeing the flowers after all these years, and with that, the two mages continue on their way. 2 years after Heiter's death, Frieren and Fern arrive at a trade city to stock up on supplies. The elf says they should split up. Fern's been assigned to pick up all the essentials, and is confused about what Frieren is going to buy. She has a habit of spending what little they have on unnecessary stuff, so the apprentice decides to tail the master. She follows her to an accessory shop, but gets distracted by a cat and doesn't see what Frieren actually purchases. Fern is about to leave her alone and get her own shopping done when she overhears the elf ask a local where the best place to get desserts is. They never indulge in sweets. Fern decides to continue to follow her to a seedy bar filled with smoke and rough-looking adventurers. Fern becomes nervous as the patrons eye up her teacher, who proceeds to ask the grizzled men where to find the best desserts in town. The bar erupts in laughter. If she's looking for something sweet, then look no further, because they know the best place in town. Fern drops the surveillance, realizing she hasn't even started her own shopping. Later, she meets with Frieren at the inn. She's surprised when the elf tells her to get ready. They're going to a restaurant. Fern forgot that it was her birthday, and Frieren gives her the present she picked up at the accessory shop. She's ecstatic that her master wants to get to know her. The two depart and later find themselves deep in the forest. Fern's defensive magic is improving, but Frieren points out the gaps in her defense. Literally, she almost kills her. The elf imparts her wisdom. Defensive magic drains mana fast, so she has to be careful and precise. Frieren takes her to a small village, and an elderly man recognizes her immediately and knows she's there to see the place where Qual is sealed. The man tells them that Himmel visited every year to check on the seal and promised that Frieren wouldn't leave them hanging after he passes away. They make it to the sealed demon, and Frieren confirms her suspicions about the condition of the seal after so much time. They'll break it tomorrow. That night, Fern inquires about Frieren sealing the demon and not being able to beat him. She tells her that Qual was a powerful mage who invented Zoltrak, a powerful offensive magic that was almost impossible to counter. Obviously, Fern hasn't been reading her history textbooks, so maybe a practical demonstration is in order. The next day, Frieren breaks the seal. Qual recognizes the elf. It's only been 80 years, barely an afternoon nap to them. The demon tells them they'd better get ready to die. It's Zoltrak time. And Frieren tells Fern to defend them from it. It's just regular offensive magic. How disappointing. Frieren fills them in. After they sealed him away, mages everywhere studied and replicated his spell, and then devised methods to defend against it. These days, it's nothing special. No matter, Qual analyzes their defensive magic in seconds and tries to overwhelm them by depleting their mana. Fern distracts him, while Frieren hovers in the air, utters Zoltrak, and blasts a gaping hole through the demon. Seemed pretty easy, but also satisfying, and it's time for the two to move on. Another year goes by, and the two mages find themselves at the Grange Channel. An elderly gentleman takes them to the shoreline, riddled with the remains of ships that couldn't navigate the hazards along the coast. The man offers a grimoire written by the legendary mage Flamma. Frieren accepts it as payment to clean up the shoreline, despite Fern's protests. She's recently read that every grimoire attributed to Flamma is spurious, but she agreed to help for her own reasons. The pair spend 3 months in town, and winter is upon them. Fern wakes up a sleepy Frieren and forces her down to the shore to continue their work. It dawns on Fern that Frieren might not be as responsible as she thought. They remove a large pile of driftwood and broken ships and set it alight. That night, the elderly man asks if the shore will be cleaned up before their New Year's festival they hold each year. The pair promises that they'll be able to get the job done. They finish the night before the festival. Fern is worried that Frieren won't be able to wake up at the crack of dawn when the festival takes place and witness the sunrise. She wonders why the elf wants to see the sunrise anyway. She normally doesn't demonstrate any sensitivity to these kinds of things. Frieren remembers back to the last time she was in town, with her party, and feels guilty for sleeping in and missing the festival. Fern wakes her up before dawn, and the two go to the shoreline to witness the sunrise. Frieren doesn't really get it, but when she sees how much Fern enjoys it, she begins to understand, and thanks her apprentice for being there to wake her up on time. The pair head to visit Eisen. Frieren asks if there's anything she can do while they're there. Eisen tells her that's the same thing she asked Heiter. The elf is surprised he knows, and even more so when she finds out that the two often wrote each other. The next day, the three of them go out. It turns out that Eisen is looking for the notes of Flamma. Frieren has her doubts, but Eisen assures her that the lead he got from Heiter is legit. The elf says they should start by looking for a giant tree, and be quick about it because Fern doesn't like it when they waste time leisurely. The young mage is anxious to get going. After searching a while, Fern notices a giant tree, and they all embark. Frieren asks Eisen why he even wants the notes, and he explains that he's doing it for her. 30 years ago, at Himmel's funeral, she broke down because she didn't get to know him better. It's rumored that in Flamma's notes, there's something about communing with the dead. He wants to help her with her regrets. They make it to the tree, and Fern notices a powerful protection spell around it. Frieren sighs. It's been 1,000 years. She remembers back to her master planting the tree, and her wondering how it was going to protect the place. She breaks the spell and reveals a small house. A book floats above a table inside. The elf grabs the book, and Fern wonders whether the notes really are the legendary mage's writings. Frieren dispels her doubts, and Eisen tells her that the elf was Flamma's best student. The dwarf asks if it says anything about speaking to the dead. Not to worry, it was already open to the very page describing it, almost like her teacher knew she'd return, regret in hand. The notes describe how on the northernmost end of the continent, Flamma arrived at a place the world calls heaven, Aureole, the land where souls rest. If it's in the north, then that means the land is now where the Demon King's castle stands. Frieren agrees to check it out and talk to Himmel if possible. The three make their way back. While the elf sleeps, Eisen asks if Frieren is a good teacher. Fern says that the elf seems to be indifferent to her presence, but she still buys her presents on her birthday, so she's a bit of an enigma. Eisen tells her she's a great teacher. They get back to Eisen's place, where he'll remain. He's too old to want to travel again. The dwarf tells Fern it took them 10 years to get there on their first time around, so she'd better buckle up. The young mage dreams of Heiter, telling her that Frieren will be taking care of her from now on. If she's bad, he'll come back to haunt her. Well, he might even come back to say hi if she's good. When the pair make it to the next town, a local warns them about the mountain pass. Apparently, recent adventurers have been met by ghosts when they travel through the mountains. Frieren thinks it might be the undead, but they'll need more information. What they learn is that the ghosts appear as dead family members or friends that look exactly like they did when they were alive. Some even say they've spoken to them. There goes the undead theory. Zombies aren't very presentable, and nobody stops for a chat when they see one. Frieren has an idea of what the monster may be and says it's best to avoid it. But Fern is concerned about the villagers and tells the elf they should help them, to which she agrees, teasing her that the apprentice is beginning to sound like her old companions, and they have to travel through the mountain pass anyway. The villagers didn't just disappear. Frieren asks whether Fern can discern what type of magic she's detecting. It's illusion magic. Frieren suspects it's an Eisen. They prey exclusively on people and trick them with illusions of the dead before the victims join them. But they're relatively weak. All they have to do is use offensive magic to defeat the ghost. But Frieren is concerned about Fern being unable to shoot the ghost illusions of her loved ones. As they continue on the path, the fog grows thick. A vision of Heiter appears to Fern, using her cherished memories of her adoptive father to lure her in. She freezes up, and Frieren asks if she needs help right before a vision of Himmel appears to her. She's surprised it isn't her master, like the last time she ran into an Eisen. The modeled behavior of the illusion is too good, and tells her to shoot, which she gladly carries out. She blasts through the fake ghost without hesitation, and with more power than necessary. The monster, now visible, hovers above Heiter, its hands covering its face. Fern takes the monster out, leaving only a black ash-like substance in its wake. The village saved. The pair make it to the Regal Canyon and stumble upon a dragon and its nest. Hiding in the bushes, Frieren notices a grimoire amongst its hoard, one she's been looking for a long time. Frieren identifies it as a solar dragon and tells her apprentice to take it out, but avoid destroying the nest. Fern gears up and lets rip. Her magic just bounces off the beast, merely waking it up. The two make a break for it and eventually lose the dragon. They're going to need some more help. Frieren remembers Eisen telling her they need a frontliner. He suggested his apprentice, a warrior named Stark, who just happens to live in a nearby village. An old woman approaches them and says that Stark wants to meet them. Well, that was easy. 3 years before, the dragon almost destroyed the village when Stark appeared. The dragon dipped, and Stark has been there ever since. Frieren tells him they need a warrior for their travels, and mentions the grimoire. They just need to defeat the dragon that he's been unable to defeat for years. The elf just needs him to keep the beast busy for 30 seconds. It turns out he's never really defeated anything. The dragon had left of its own accord, and he's been treated as a hero ever since. Frieren gives him until the following morning to decide whether he'll join their party. That night, they hear noises in the distance, and the elf tells Fern it's probably Stark. The young mage decides to check it out, and discovers the warrior practicing, carving a giant fissure in the rock. Fern asks him why he continues to train if he doesn't intend to fight the dragon. He tells her as long as he's around, it gives the townfolk a certain level of comfort and safety. It's his job to protect the town, but when things come down to it, he'll probably run. The scar on his forehead isn't from some battle with a monster. It was from the first time his master hit him. Fern doesn't think he'll run. The first time she fought a monster, she ran. Frieren refused to step in and help, so when she couldn't run anymore, instinct kicked in, and she found her resolve. The next day, Frieren and Fern go to the fissure, but he's not there. They think he's bailed for sure, so they head out. When they make it back to the dragon's lair, they hear Stark's voice. She only needs 30 seconds, right? He makes the elf promise that if he dies, she'll finish the job. The three of them scout out the dragon. Fern notices the warrior's hands shaking. Frieren chuckles a bit. He reminds her of Eisen. He trembled exactly the same way when they were up against powerful foes. The dwarf said that if he wasn't afraid, he wouldn't have made it as far as he did. Stark approaches the dragon, but it doesn't attack immediately. Frieren tells Fern that dragons are smart. It left the village alone because it realized the strength of its opponent. Eisen didn't strike his apprentice because he was disappointed. It was instinct. He was afraid of the boy's power. Stark engages the beast. The first swing of his axe cracks the dragon's claws. Leaping in the air, he grabs hold of its head while it takes off. The warrior is launched into the air as the dragon rears up, fire burning in its throat, ready to roast the boy. Stark takes his axe and brings it down on the beast's skull with enough force to create a crater on impact. He turns to Frieren, screaming that now's her chance. Why is she just standing there? Come on, Forget it. She's not stepping in. What's the point? It's already dead. Frieren congratulates him and excitedly makes her way to the hoard of treasure. Stark thinks it's odd. His master told him stories of how she made their adventure a ridiculous one, like the time they spent finding a spell to make shaved ice. But it wasn't in a bad way. Her silliness made it fun. Even though Eisen thought they were wasting their time on such frivolous things, Himmel assured him that if they weren't going to make it back home, they might as well have fun. The trio gives the villagers the good news and sets off. The grimoire they collected contains a spell to see through clothes. Fern confirms that it works, but isn't impressed with what her master has to offer, and is even less so when she uses it to check out Stark. The party makes it to the city of Qual. They hear of monster activity in the region, and no one's allowed to pass through the checkpoint, so they're stuck in the city. Frieren tells them to check out the town while she finds an inn. Fern overhears that they might be stuck there for up to 2 years and tells Stark. Neither of them are prepared to wait that long. They decide to check out the Merchants Guild for leads on getting through the checkpoint, but even trade has been shut down. Time to check out the black market, but that doesn't get them anywhere either. Stark is even more impatient about this than Fern. He wants to make it back from this adventure in time to see his master still breathing. They find Frieren hiding in an alley, and she tells them she's being followed. But it turns out she's not in any trouble. Her reputation precedes her. But they do need them to take care of some trouble, and it looks like the checkpoint won't be a problem for a hero. Later, the trio finds themselves on Eng Road in the north, helping to clear a landslide from a pass to assist a traveler. Stark complains about having to clear away the rocks instead of just moving the cart using magic, but Fern insists that clearing the path would help the next traveler who comes through. The traveler offers to help escort them to the next town. He mentions that he hasn't seen an elf in a long time. Apparently, even Frieren hasn't seen another in 400 years. They don't exactly have much of a sex drive, so they're going through a quiet extinction. They make it to the next town, and the traveler tells them about the upcoming Liberation Festival that commemorates when Frieren and the heroes vanquished the demons plaguing the town. They decorate the statue of the party in the town square and celebrate. Frieren never really understood why they got so many statues erected. Himmel had said that he hopes the statues remind her of them, since she'll be around long after they die. When they make it to town, the traveler notices a certain resemblance between Frieren and the statue. Meh, small world. After the celebration, the trio sets off once again. Stark realizes that he hasn't even asked them where they're going yet. Nowhere special, really. They're just making a quick stop by heaven to talk to the dead. Okay, he's game. They reach Graf Granat's domain and notice the unusually large guard population. Suddenly, Frieren whips out her staff. Fern is concerned. Maybe they shouldn't do that sort of thing in public. The elf explains that demons are approaching and gets ready to attack. She's immediately thrown to the ground by a guard. The demon turns to Graf Granat and asks if he was so kind as to hire an assassin just for him. But the man assures the demon he doesn't even know these adventurers. They're probably just confused. It's not every day you see a demon peace envoy. Frieren is thrown in the dungeon. Fern and Stark visit her and let her know her sentence is only like 2 or 3 years. Pretty light. Apparently, way back when, one of the Demon King's confidants escaped and has been gathering a following who are now locked in battle with the town, which explains the peace envoy. Frieren only sees demons as monsters. She asks whether her companions know why they learned to speak their language in the first place. She recalls when she and the other heroes came upon a young demon who had killed a child from the village they were staying in. Himmel couldn't bring himself to do it, and the chief then stopped the elf from killing her, brought the demon into his home, and tried to raise her like a daughter. One day, the demon girl killed the chief and burned down his house. She then offered his daughter as a replacement for the one she killed. The townsfolk were terrified of her as she tried to explain her logic, and she knowing that they wished her dead the entire time she lived there. Seeing that this approach wasn't working, she tried to take the child as a hostage. Himmel then, without hesitation, severed her arm and saved the girl. The young demon half-heartedly called out to her mother, and Frieren blasted the little bit. But before she died, the demon explained that she called out mother so that humans wouldn't attack her, despite demons abandoning their young after giving birth. Frieren tells Stark and Fern that demons are just liars who feign innocence to avoid being killed. Elsewhere, the demon Frieren tried to kill converses with his subordinates. He recognizes the elf from somewhere and finds it interesting that she saw through their lies, even pinning down the very reason they learned the human tongue. Graf Granat takes the demons to his son's room to show him the sword his son carried when their leader slaughtered him. He drops the axe and aggressively points the dead boy's sword to the demon's throat, his guards at the ready. He was just waiting for a chance to avenge his child. The demon uses this chance to try to manipulate him by explaining he kept his father's room the same as Graf did his son's. It works. When the demons are alone, one of the subordinates asks what a father is. Beats him. He'll say anything to save his skin. He's waiting for the town to lower their guard so they can raze it to the ground. The demon asks where Drought went, and the girl, Lenya, replies that he went to eliminate an obstacle. Turns out he's in the dungeons. After taking out the guard, he introduces himself to Frieren as her executioner. Apparently, she's the only obstacle standing in Ara's, their leader's, way. She warns him that she's very strong, stronger than Ara the Guillotine. Drought laughs and tries to use the same thread spell he used on the guard. However, Frieren is smarter than he was and concentrates mana around her throat to keep her head. The demon is confident that he's won, and Frieren applauds his efforts. But too bad he can't applaud hers. She quickly severs the arm controlling the thread, and then the other, and wraps her hands around his throat as he tries to talk his way out of it. She makes sure he'll never utter another word. Elsewhere, Fern tells Stark they should petition Graf to release Frieren. He tells her that when Lugnir's cold, dead eyes were locked on the elf, it scared the crap out of him, feeling like the demon didn't even register them as a threat. Graf goes to confront Lugnir about Frieren's escape and the disappearance of Drought. When the demon can't talk his way out of the situation, he bites his own hand to draw enough blood to use as a whip-like blade, killing the guards in a single slash. He wounds Graf, but keeps him alive. He needs him to lower the town's barrier. A hooded figure passes Fern and Stark on the street. Fern immediately recognizes the elf. Frieren explains that demons turn into mana particles and dissipate after death, so there's only an empty cell and a guard killed by magic. This doesn't bode well for Frieren's situation. She says that she's going to flee town, and that her companions can deal with the demons themselves. On her own again, Frieren detects a great deal of mana nearby, and figures that Ara's been observing her. That night, Stark and Fern sneak into Graf's mansion to kill the peace envoys. Meanwhile, Lugnir and Lenya are upstairs, annoyed that Flamma's magical barrier has successfully kept demons out, and demands to know how he was able to let the envoy in. They decide to search for a grimoire containing knowledge on the barrier. Stark enters the room and tries to free Graf, who tells him to take the crest hanging from his neck so the guards will listen to the kid. He's done for anyway. Stark winds up to smash the chair, since he can't cut through the magical bindings, when the demons return. Graf tells them that the boy is probably there to try and free his mage friend, not knowing she's escaped. Lugnir believes him, and tells Stark if he leaves now, he'll let him live. But the warrior stands between them, steadies his hand, and attacks. Lugnir pins him to the ground, but commends his efforts. If he was smart, he wouldn't have come alone. Well, it's a good thing he didn't. He was just the distraction. He's good at that at least. Fern hovers outside the window, taking Lugnir by surprise since Linia didn't detect her mana. She blasts the demon, who's taken aback at how much humans have altered Zoltrak to specifically kill demons. He's lucky he survived. A specialist in blood magic, he's able to stem the bleeding. Stark convinces Fern to leave. They grab Graf and take off out the window. Lugnir tells Linia to take the warrior. He'll take the mage. Fern reminds him of the first mage who struck him with that magic, the mage who's sent more demons to the grave than any other in history, Frieren the Slayer. Stark and Fern get Graf all patched up, and he says he'll pardon Frieren. Hearing her name, Graf realizes that he owes her and the heroes a great deal for fending off Aura the last time they passed through. Meanwhile, Frieren directly confronts Aura. She has more puppets than the last time they fought. Aura's magic specialty allows her to control people at will, and being one of the 7 sages of destruction, she's incredibly powerful. Graf explains that Aura measures her own mana against her enemy, and whoever has more takes control. Her puppets follow her even after their bodies decay, leaving only their animated suits of armor to do her bidding. Once there was one who was able to resist her, but anyone with such strength of will became her primary target. Frieren continues to fight Aura's minions and manages to dispel the magic used to control them. Nobody's ever been able to accomplish this before, and it takes the demon by surprise. The last time they fought, Frieren had cast flashy spells willy-nilly, using up mana without regard. Himmel thought it was reckless and had a few choice words for her afterwards. But when Aura points out that she shouldn't care about the words of a dead man rotting in the ground, Frieren is reminded that demons are just monsters. No reason to hold back now. At the church where Stark and Fern took Graf, the warrior says he's going to go find Frieren so they can take out Lugnir and Linia. He gives Fern the crest so the guards will listen to her. Fern points out that he's covered in blood. She's one to talk. She's got some on her clothes too. Only then she notices the mana in the blood and rips off her cloak. But before she can rid Stark of his, a giant coagulated blood spike rips through the air towards the mage, piercing her shoulder. Stark tries to run to her aid, but Linia appears, conjures an axe, and the two, locked in combat, careen off the town wall. Lugnir is surprised he wasn't able to mortally wound Fern and insists on asking a few questions. How strong is the boy? He's one of Eisen's best students. Apparently not a good enough answer. Linia likes to toy with her prey and drag things out. He will suffer. Where is Frieren hiding? She fled town after escaping from prison. Also not a good enough answer. 0 for 2. Good going, Fern. Lugnir ruminates on the subject, while Fern reacquaints herself with her staff. The demon realizes the elf has gone after Aura directly. With her staff pointed at his back, Fern demands to know why he sees Frieren as the only threat. She could blast a hole through his heart at this distance. He'd like to see her try. She does, almost succeeds, and confirms that his heart is his weak point. Frieren had told Fern that she was much faster than her at casting attack spells, and it looks like she was right. Meanwhile, Linia thinks her battle with Stark is over, but he refuses to give in and gets back up. Lugnir continues to think he's superior to Fern, but finds that he can't keep up with her sheer ability to fire off spells faster than he can defend, so he'll wait until she runs out of mana. But that approach doesn't seem to be working either. Hey, Linia, hurry up and kill the boy. Stark is stuck on the defensive and learns that Linia can read people's mana and copy their fighting technique. She once witnessed Eisen on the battlefield, which explains how she knows his moves. Linia strikes Stark down and turns to go help Lugnir. But the boy remembers back to Eisen's words. When facing a stronger opponent, all you have to do is keep getting back up and hitting your enemy. The winner will be whoever's left standing. Stark leaps into the air with no regard for defense. Linia embeds her axe in his side. Fortunately, even though her technique is difficult to defend against, her attacks have no weight behind them. The boy uses lightning strike, almost cleaving her in half, and her mana begins to dissipate. Luknir calls out for her, but that second of hesitation was his last. Zoltrak. And there's no coming back from that one. As Luknir lay dying, he assures that his master will prevail against hers. He wonders why Fern's mana is so weak, yet he was still overwhelmed by the sheer number of powerful attacks. She isn't even depleted. He comes to a sudden realization and calls both Fern and Frieren a disgrace to mages. Fern agrees before she beams him. Flamma waltzes into a burning town and finds a dead demon general. She follows the rut left in the dirt with her eyes until they land on a small elven girl. She correctly assumes that she's the one who killed the demon and walks over to her, impressed by the amount of mana she possesses. Flamma's mana looks as if it pales in comparison, but the young Frieren recognizes her as a far more powerful mage, just trying to disguise the true depth of her mana. That seems to be satisfactory enough for her to pick up the elf and declare that she's to become her new apprentice. And since the entire town and everyone in it is gone, they're stopped by 3 demon mages outside of the village. They tell Flamma they'll spare her life if she puts the child down. She'll put the child down all right, but she's not in the mood to spare anything. Before they can even react, the mage blasts a hole in the side of the mountain, vaporizing them in an instant. She tells Frieren that she deceives and kills her enemies by hiding her true power, making a mockery of the art of magic itself, in some folks' opinions. After allowing her to recover a bit, Flamma gets Frieren to practice concealing her mana. When the elf asks how long to keep it up, she says as long as she has, her entire life. One day, they head into a town to run some errands, and Frieren wonders why demons don't suppress theirs to gain the upper hand. Flamma explains that demons are usually individualistic creatures, and regardless of how loose a society they live in, there needs to be some form of hierarchy. Just as humans display their power through status and wealth, demons use their mana to demonstrate theirs. The stronger they are, the more desperate they are to show it, though they can barely even control it. Flamma had spent the rest of her life teaching the elf offensive and defensive magic, and her last request was that she leave flowers by her grave, and teaches her the first spell she ever learned, which has nothing to do with battle or violence. Frieren squares up against Aura, who sees the pitiful amount of mana surrounding Frieren, and whips out her scales of obedience to weigh their souls against each other. She's wholly convinced of her victory. Frieren's mana hasn't changed in the 80 years since their last battle. Aura unsheathes a sword and saunters towards the elf. Frieren thanks her for her overconfidence. She might have been overrun with numbers, and then informs her that she's spent the past 1,000 years in a state of suppression. Frieren unleashes her mana. The only powerful aura here is the one surrounding her now. As the elf turns to walk away, she tells the demon to take her sword and cut her own head off. Graf beholds the field of fallen soldiers' armor. He thanks Frieren for keeping them intact to honor the dead. Frieren turns to her companions and thanks them for taking care of the others for her. Graf gets a tip from a soldier and finds his son's amulet on one of the breastplates. As a reward, Graf hands over the grimoire related to the barrier magic surrounding the town. Frieren knows it's an obvious fake, but accepts it as their reward anyway. Graf asks them to linger for a while so that the townsfolk can thank their saviors, so the trio stays to help rebuild the town and mingle with the people. They hold a ceremony to honor the fallen, and after a short while, they head out. Apparently, the road ahead is difficult, and travel is regulated. To pass through, they need to be accompanied by a first-class mage. Though Frieren is certainly strong enough, she doesn't have any certifications. The institutions that award them change far too quickly for an elf to keep up with, but there's a town along the way where she can get certified. The trio heads towards the mountain pass, and they're quickly overcome by a blizzard. They become lost, and Stark passes out. They can't travel by magic in the storm, so Fern decides to drag him along. Luckily, Frieren knows of a shelter at the foot of the mountain, and it looks quite well maintained even. When they get there, they hear noises inside, and Fern is adamant about finding somewhere else to stay when she sees a man doing squats in there. The man notices that Frieren is an elf, like himself, and it's been quite a while since he's seen one of his own kind. He introduces himself as Kraft the monk, and the others introduce themselves in turn, except for Stark, who's still out cold. He commends them on their journey to heaven. Most people aren't so pious. The next morning, Stark wakes up with a start, having slept in the same bed as this strange man. Kraft tells him to stay and rest, while Frieren and Fern help dig out his supply wagon. Kraft wonders why he hasn't heard of Frieren before. They're both elves, and it's strange that they haven't run into each other or even heard tales. Nearly 6 months pass, and the group successfully survives the winter. Kraft gives Frieren a carved pendant fashioned after his own, and asks that she give it to Fern, believing she's the most pious of the crew. Kraft and the trio then bid each farewell and go their separate ways. As they head through the mountain pass, Frieren faints and Fern carries her, still believing Stark to be a pervert. The elf dreams about herself and the heroes embarking on their journey to kill the Demon King. Himmel carried a replica of the hero's sword of legend, hoping they'd find the real one on the way. The trio eventually makes it to a small mountain village, and they're greeted by a child, the chief of the Village of the Sword. She recounts the recent destruction caused by the Lord of the Mountains. Stark knows something of this village. Legend has it that the great hero Himmel came and successfully pulled the hero's sword from the stone. The chief chastises Frieren for being late. She was supposed to come clear out the monsters after half a century. The next day, they go about clearing the monsters at the mouth of the cave. Stark turns to ask Frieren something when suddenly a giant beast descends from above. Stark leaps into action, severing one of the creature's arms. And from the protection of Fern's defensive barrier, Frieren has an opening to blast it away. Stark is confused as to why the hero's sword is still in the cave. It turns out that Himmel couldn't pull the sword from the stone and had to accept being a fake hero. They decided to cover up the story so he could be seen as some mythic hero. The truth didn't really matter. The trio takes their leave, and Frieren promises to return in 50 years to clear out the monsters again. When they make it to the next town, Frieren mentions that it's Stark's birthday and wonders what Fern got him. She didn't even know it was his birthday. Frieren smugly pulls out the potion she bought that dissolves clothing, but Fern isn't impressed and dumps its contents on the elf. Fern goes to look for the warrior to ask what he wants for his birthday and ends up following a trail of people Stark helped throughout the day. She finally catches up to him looking at the clouds, and she's less than thrilled with his interpretation of their shapes. She invites him to go for a walk and just bluntly asks him what he wants. Stark is confused. He's never gotten a present before. In his village, they valued warriors and looked down on the weak. The only person who treated him with any kindness was his brother. But when demons attacked their village, Stark fled and left him to fight. Fern consoles him and tells him to pick out his own gift. That evening, they head back to the inn and find Frieren cooking giant Hamburg steaks. Apparently, Eisen always cooked them on their party's birthdays. They're for warriors who put in hard work. Stark makes the connection that that's why his brother would cook them for his birthday. On the day of the attack, his brother had told him to run, to survive. He cared about him more than he thought. Thank you for sticking until the end. Subscribe for more videos like this.